The living room was off limits. There was too much that might get messed up or broken. I guess he chose rooms in honor of the sacrifices my mother had made to make our home beautiful. In the bedroom, where would I go when I fell? I wouldn't fall on the wooden footboards. There was an aisle between my mother's closet and my father's bed. That was too narrow. On the left side of the doorway was my mother's dressing table, where I'd sit and put on necklaces, earrings, nail polish, and look in the mirror. There wasn't room for me to flail around, so my father had to be very specific about the direction in which his blows would aim me. If my cousin was visiting, he would inform her, his voice sincere but matter of fact, as if he owed an explanation. I'm going to have to take Toi to the bathroom. He preferred the bathroom when she was visiting, except when my mother was in on it, and then we needed a bigger space. If, for example, my mother had told him I talked back, he'd say, "We're going to have to speak to Toi in the kitchen." He'd pull me by the arm and close the kitchen door, which had glass panes, so that my cousin could see. But she said she averted her eyes, knowing it would humiliate me. She remembers him sliding off his belt. She remembers me pleading each time the belt hit. She remembers him telling me, as he was beating me, in rhythm, why he was doing it and what I shouldn't do the next time. Then I would come out of the bathroom, trying not to show how I'd been afraid for my life, how I had pleaded without pride, as if these things would have made her hate me. You would think that one treated so cruelly would kill the abuser, throw him out of the brain forever. What a horrific irony that the abuser is the one most taken in, most remembered. The imprint of those who were loving and kind is secondary. Sometimes I thought that's why my father beat me, because he was afraid he would be forgotten, and he achieved what he wanted. In the deepest place of judgment, not critical thinking, not on that high plane, but first waking judgment, judgment awakened with perception, judgment of the sort that decides what inner face to turn toward the morning sun in that first choosing moment of what to say to myself, the place from which language blossoms. I choose, must choose my father's words. The twisted snarl of his unbelief turned everything good into something undeserved, so that nothing convinces enough. No man or woman or child, no play or work of art. There is no inner loyalty, no way of belonging. I cannot trust what I feel and connect to. I cannot love or hold anything in my hand, any fragile thing, a living blue egg, my own baby, in the same way that I never convinced my father I was his. I must rest on it as on bedrock. Okay, and that's that first section. And then the second section starts with this one. It's called A Memory of the Future. I see my father after his death. I caught a plane about 11 in the morning, and we were at the funeral home about 2. My father had been dead about 10 hours. We had chosen the mortician who had been my grandfather's old competitor, whose son, unlike my father, had stayed in the family business. I wanted to see my father before he was ready, but the mortician didn't want to take me back. He talked about germs, about me washing my hands after that. I didn't know if he was afraid of my emotions, that I would burst into uncontrollable tears, or if there was something back there he didn't want me to see. Maybe it was dirty or old-fashioned, or maybe it just wasn't the rule. So often people can't break the rules. I persuaded him it was clean, like an old-fashioned kitchen with tile and stainless steel sinks and counters. There was a huge blue bottle in the corner with a siphon in it, a black and white tile floor. It looked efficient, not spiffed up like his French provincial waiting room. Then I came upon my father, swaddled in a layer of linen, zipped in plastic and bound with tape, his face the only part of him free. The color was pure, as if it had been drained of age and illness. That look of dark acceptance, that fixed state that penetrated without hope or understanding, had been left behind. There was a softness I had never seen, his forehead unlined and smooth, as if he had been given a second beauty as a death gift. The monster had flowed out on its hard, dark wings and left behind not a shell, but one tortured a lifetime and released. Though he had been dead for 10 hours, someone told me it takes 13 for the spirit to move on, so he had not gone yet. He was still partly there, seeping out in shallow expirations. Certainly what one sees later after the embalming is an object made by the undertaker. It has nothing to do with the one dead. Though I hadn't been with him at his death, I was there to see him before the embalming and for the rest of my life to know that look of calm that had come. My cruel father had looked forward, seen heaven, and sent back this sign of peace. That night I had a dream, but not a dream, for it was as real as this very moment with all my feelings in it, and I didn't have any idea of how or why or when. Suddenly, as if I had just been born and didn't know anything before that, I didn't feel fear. Nothing else had happened, just that fear had been sucked out of me, and I didn't even remember it happening, but just felt gratitude for an absence that made my life, I swear I am not making a metaphor, feel like heaven. But as the night went on, it didn't feel like night. It felt like a trueness that made everything different and new. A worry began to encroach, a little shade of gray, like a fingernail clipping. What if this fearlessness were taken away? When I woke, I felt such joy. I shook my husband and said, "I'm free, I'm different." And then I began to put my feet over the side of the bed slowly, as if the ground was coming up to meet me. And that moment, when my feet touched the floor, something in me said, "Your father is dead." And I knew why I had felt so happy. I had forgotten that moment until today, that happiness that had tarnished like silver, like an old, old mirror in which I could no longer see my face. I don't know why I lost it, why that heaviness came back, for wasn't my father truly dead? Didn't I no longer have to fear him? But in a few days, the wonder faded, as if my mind was not ready for such light. I had to dig my way out of darkness one weighty grain at a time, as if a memory of the future had visited. And this is a group of poems that came after the Telly cycle. I'll read a few of them in a closing. Why would a black woman need a fish to love? It's shaped like a fish. Why would a black woman need a fish to love? Why did she need a flash of red living in the corner of her eye, as if she could love nothing up close, but had to step away from it, come back to drop a few seeds, and let it grab onto her, as if it caught her on some hook that couldn't hurt? Why did she need a fish, a red thorn, or among the thorns, that flower? What does her love have to do with 500 years of sorrow? Then joy coming up, like a small breath, a bubble. What does it have to do with the graveyards of the Atlantic and her mother's heart? For Telly the fish. My granddaughter named him Telly. And I thought maybe it was for those Teletubbies, you know? And then maybe Telly Savalas, somebody said. But my granddaughter didn't know Telly Savalas. But also Telly, like Telly. You're Telly. I think that's what it is. Telly's favorite artist was Alice Neal. When he first came to my house, I propped up her bright yellow shade with open window and a vase of flowers, postcard size, behind his first fish bowl. I thought it might give him something to look at, like the center of a house you keep coming back to, a hearth, a root for your eye. It was a wondering in me that came up with that thought, a kind of empathy across my air and through his water, maybe the first word I cast out between us, in case he could hear. Telly would stare at that painting for hours, hanging there with his glassy eyes wide open. At night, he wanted the bottom as if it were a warm bed. He'd lay there sort of dreaming, his eyes gray and dim and thoughtless. For months, he came back to her, the way a critic or lover can build a whole lifetime on the study of one great work. I don't know why he stopped. Maybe it was when he first noticed me. What did Whitman say about great audiences? What is that quote?
Great audiences.
Say it again.
To have a great poet, you need great poetry, you need great audience.
Thank you so much. That just came to me. I don't know why he stopped. Maybe it was when he first noticed me, the face above my hand, feeding. For sometimes when I'd set the food on top, he'd still watch me, eye to eye, as if saying, food isn't enough. Now, okay, you're going to laugh at this, but anyway. Once when I bent, he jumped out of the water and kissed my lips. What is a fish's kiss like? You'd think it would be slimy, but it was quick, nippy, hard. Maybe it was just what I expected. For all our fears of touch, it takes so long to learn how to take in. When he stopped coming to the top, I guess I did all the wrong things. The fish medicine that smelled, measured carefully for his ounce of weight. For his gills worked so hard, and he lay still, tipped over slightly, like a dead boat. How do you stop the hurt of having to breathe? After, I took him to the middle of the yellow bridge, right near the Andy Warhol Museum. I had put a paper towel in a painted egg and laid him in it. And at the top, I opened the casket and emptied him out into the water. Special ears. I liked him for his tail fin, which was long like a mermaid's and flowed like a silver blue ruffle in the water, larger than you'd expect a little fish's tail to be, generous, excessive, a bit astonishing, like a girl with too much hair. Sometimes he would rise like a submarine, straight up, as if he would nip at my finger, "Get out of my water." His mouth would open like a little scoop of blackness and let out one bubble, like a smoke ring of my father's, a message from the underworld. Another poem of a small grieving for my fish Telly. Perhaps I should forgive Telly for dying in my care. Just a fish, someone said, just get another. Lucille said, our power becomes greater when we lose the flesh. So when I poured Telly out of his painted casket, a little wooden egg, out over the rail of the yellow bridge into the all-becoming, was it a miracle that he had lived? Was it a miracle? Once when I prayed for a sign, God opened the closed vault of the sky. The sun popped out and shone directly in my face, and hail, yes, hail, started falling in July. I was afraid to believe in love. God, don't waste your miracles on me. And the sun went back like a face retreating. Telly, you are bodiless. You are with my mother and father. Say it wasn't my fault you suffered with your little working gills. Say you forgive me. And I'll read the last Telly and a poem after that. Because I was good to Telly in his life. Because I taught him Alice Neal and fed him frozen mealworms until I found out he'd lose his bright red tail color for that pleasure. Because I never left him alone when I traveled, never liking those who said their beta did just fine sitting on the edge of their office desk over the long weekend. How would you like it not to eat for 3 days, I wanted to ask? For choosing carefully among the pet sitters, interviewing, looking for one who took a fish seriously and told beta stories about how smart they are, coming up to say hi in the morning, checking you out with a certain calm or anxious look in the eye. Because I believed in one fish's brain and life and skills, because I put him in a bright casket at the end and drove him down to the famous arching yellow bridge of Pittsburgh and emptied him out into the thawing river, saying prayers for my lover or husband or brother of a year. Because of this, I am certain he sent me a gift from the China blue rivers of heaven, a lovely man who first kissed me on that bridge, sending a photo after rain of Kissing Bridge underwater. scrawled with his loose, sprawling letters, because all things are connected, a circle, bread on the water, as my mother said, always comes home. And when the goddess makes love to me, she has to pass through my father. She has to find him where he sits in a corner inside me, cold as a turd. I can't reach him anymore. I don't have the strength to yank him out and blow on his breasts. She has to tuck her fingers between his thighs and warm him slowly. First the shoulders and the tops of his arms. She has to coax the crying boy to come through the dead walking on tiptoe. Sometimes he can't find his way, feeling in the dark with his blunt fingers. And sometimes he stands there dumbstruck, his body trembling between us like a little bird's. And this is the last poem in the book. The poem is change, the poem in change. The end of the poem is change. To change in the poem, to change by the poem, to hold the change in the poem, to be changed by the poem. The poem is change. To change by writing the poem. The writing is change. To hold the change in the writing. To hold the change by writing. To breathe through the change. To write through the change. To breathe by writing. To write by breathing. To hold the breath. To hold the writing. To hold the change. To hold it. And let it go.